Welcome to this episode of CEO Perspectives, a signature webcast and podcast series by the Conference Board. CEO Perspectives are conversations that take an objective, nonpartisan look at a range of timely topics that matter most to business leaders. To help make sense of these topics, we engage experts to provide trusted insights for what's ahead. I'm Steve Odland, the CEO of the Conference Board and the host of this series. And in today's conversation, we're going to explore the successes and the failures of the United States, Mexico, and Canada trade agreement, also called the USMCA. Nearly 2 years after the launch and the replacement of the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was called NAFTA, what is working and what is not working, and how can the USMCA help with the ongoing supply chain challenges? Joining me today is Dr. Lori Esposito Murray, the president of the Committee for Economic Development, which is the public policy center of the Conference Board. Lori, welcome.
Thank you, Steve. Very pleased to be here with you for this important conversation.
Thank you. So, Lori, just give our listeners and viewers a little background first on NAFTA and then USMCA, which replaced it a couple of years ago.
Well, it's interesting, Steve, because this actually goes back to 1980 and the Reagan campaign. It was actually Governor Reagan during his campaign who made his promise that he wanted to open up trade with North America and started to pursue that first with Canada. And then his successor, a vice president who became President George H.W. Bush, actually negotiated the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And it was actually signed by President Bush, along with Brian Mulroney and President Salinas in 1992, and came into force in 1994. Steve, it's important to step back. And one of the most important things about this agreement is that it's precedent setting. And remember where we were in the world. The Soviet Union had collapsed. It is now coming into force in 1994. And both President Reagan and President Bush recognizing where the global economy was going, particularly after Gorbachev came into power, that there was going to be more openness. This was a precedent-setting agreement at the creation of globalization and trade. So that collapsed.
Yeah, and it stood for a long time, and it did a lot of great things. It lowered trade barriers and encouraged trade within North America, but it dated over time. I mean, things changed. The internet really took off during after that period of time and so forth, and so it needed to be modernized, right?
Right, and what happened was that the economies also started changing, and the economic pressure started changing. You have the rise of China, you have the financial crisis. So the U.S. domestic economy and trade also, going through dramatic changes. And so President Trump, who had called this agreement one of the worst trade agreements ever, undertook renegotiating it, and that really was an update. It kept all the liberalization measures. The tariffs were gone, the non-tariff barriers were removed. That was all under NAFTA. And what President Trump did in the renegotiation was really several major areas. Address the labor problem to create a more level playing field for American workers. And that had to do with improving the rules of origin for automobiles, trucks, other products, and also allowing for more labor reforms and labor union, fair use of labor unions and representation in Mexico. It also opened up the dairy trade with Canada, broke through those barriers, and increased the content, North American content in automobiles. But to your point about the economy changing, it also included digital trade rules, and which were really significant and very much updated. Intellectual property updates in terms of making those better. Anti-corruption and regulatory practices were also improved.
Yeah, I think from a business standpoint, it's the digital and the IP parts of the USMCA that were really the update to NAFTA. So should people talk about USMCA as a trade agreement? Are there any provisions for defense in the agreement?
Well, what's important is, I do want to make one other point about USMCA that's really significant, is that NAFTA became, because it was the first and was the model for free trade agreements, it became the symbol of everything that was right and everything that was wrong with free trade agreements. So it became larger than itself. And you see this in the American political debates, even in the Ohio primary. This past 2 weeks, that election in the Republican primary, there were still complaints about NAFTA and NAFTA's effect on the economy were an important part of that discussion. So it became larger than itself. But the changes that were actually in the USMCA that were perhaps most significant was that support for free trade agreements had really almost collapsed in the United States. And the labor provisions that were in there, along with, as you said, attracting business with the digital provisions, the intellectual property, there was a consensus with labor supporting this and business supporting this, that it was actually very popular and passed in Congress, which was a phenomenal achievement given where free trade popularity was in the American public's perception.
Yeah, but it's really not a military or a defense pact per se. It's a trade pact which encourages mutual alignment and obviously greater levels of peace. So you have to think about it in multiple ways. This whole thing about it being an unfair or the worst deal ever. That I think that the people who say that we're concerned about some of the jobs that had moved to Mexico, right? It's because labor arbitrage. It's cheaper to produce in Mexico. But if you're going to think about a free trade region, you are going to have things move a little bit, aren't you? And you have to sort of adjust to that.
Right, exactly. And it was the success of NAFTA and USMCA, has been really removing the tariffs, removing the barriers. Merchandise trade increased by 300%. Right. But the benefits of trade are dispersed throughout the economy. But the negative impacts are concentrated. And that's why they're felt more strongly. So every American gets to spend less money on clothes. But communities that were single economic communities around a particular industry, whether it was automotives or apparel or textiles, those communities got hit, and they got hit hard. And it was concentrated hit.
Right. So if a manufacturing plant closed in the U.S. in one of these small communities, as you said, and moved to Mexico, well, that's a disproportionate hit. But then the cost savings or the price savings across for all consumers, because it lowers the cost. Ultimately, trade seeks the lowest cost place for each piece of the trade, but net, it reduces it for the region and it benefits. But so this is the deal with trade: is we have to seek free trade agreements. We have to have more trade. It creates peace. It creates prosperity. But you do have to deal with these communities that are affected by it and have some good economic policy behind them, don't you?
Yeah, and I think that was, if you look back in terms of the failure of what failed in NAFTA. Right. I think the not accompanying the free trade agreement itself with upskilling, training, community support types of programs to actually help transition the labor as well. We're dealing with the same issues now for different reasons because of the acceleration of technology, as well as competition increasing. And you need those packages you need that collaboration between business, the academic community, and the public policy sector to do that upskilling and training. And that was not part of NAFTA. It was very much at the time, even President Clinton said that, this is going to bring many jobs to America, many good jobs to America. It did bring many good jobs to America, but we also lost jobs as well. And those support programs, that focus was not there.
Yeah, things move around. So as you look at the USMCA today, what's working really well? Just some examples, and what's not working so well.
Well, I think, as I said, the fact that we locked in the liberalization of the economy, with Mexico, with the EU, particularly with Mexico, it was the first agreement that had two advanced economies and a developing economy. It was the first free trade agreement along those lines, and we were able to lock in some very good advantages so that you could actually build this regional trade zone. We got rid of trade barriers. All three economies, benefited from that, and overall, what's interesting is that according to a study that if by the Trade Partnership Worldwide, that if NAFTA went away or USMCA went away, they would lose about 1.8 million American jobs. And so you could see just by that one statistic, the impact that this free trade arrangement among the three countries has had, this regional arrangement.
Yeah, so now, the headlines are all about supply chain disruptions. And we, like it or not, we have an integrated global supply chain, not in every sector and not in, in a perfect way, but lots of manufacturing that goes on in China and other nations around the world. And so, you start to think about USMCA and you've got two adjacent countries. What role could USMCA play, or our trading partners with Canada and Mexico play in the current supply chain disruptions?
Well, what's really important, and as you said, we have dual crises. We have the crisis of the pandemic, and we have the crisis of the war in Ukraine, and what the disruptions in supply chains. And so every country, and particularly the United States, but also businesses, are looking at how do you adapt to these tectonic shifts. And we have this free trade arrangement where we actually have a regionalized economy going, and in order to that can very much help in terms of supply chain. So needless to say, with both Mexico and Canada, energy is a key component that could, particularly with the ban on Russian oil that the U.S. has imposed, critical. But in terms of growth, as far as supply chains, all countries around the world are looking at where they're going to near shore or friend shore. And we have the benefit that Mexico has been in this arrangement with the U.S. It's geographically located very close to us, as has Canada. But as I said, Canada has been was a developed country coming into the free trade agreement, obviously. But Mexico actually has had, because of geography, it's next to the U.S. Because of NAFTA, it is integrated with the U.S. economy, and because of NAFTA, USMCA, it has locked in these liberalizations of its economy. And so, whether it's pharmaceuticals or medical devices, or even moving manufacturing or supply chain components to Mexico, which might take a little bit longer, or Canada, which is also important in those areas that I just mentioned. That may take a couple of years, but it's definitely something we should be looking at. And obviously, with energy, that's real time.
Well, yeah, I mean, the energy thing. Both Canada and Mexico have oil, which is one form of energy, but they also have geothermal and hydro and other forms of energy. It seems like there's a lot of room for more energy integration, particularly with contiguous borders. And, with the price of shipping today, it just seems like it would be sure a lot cheaper, even if you were shipping by boat, to ship it between these three countries that are right here rather than shipping it all the way around the world. So, but, you can't just snap your finger and relocate plants and all of that. But it just seems like we should be thinking more about this hemisphere a little bit more and leveraging the agreement.
I think you're absolutely on point, Steve. And I think that is really where our focus ought to be, as well as it's, obviously in Canada and Mexico's interests as well. The problem, what's interesting on the energy side, is that it's not a supply problem, as you said. It's not a supply problem. Canada has more than enough oil to provide to help fill the gap that's happening, which is it's a small gap, but it's still 8% of our oil came from Russia. Canada has the supplies. The problem is actually getting it here. And so we have the option of rail or or pipelines. The pipeline capacity is full. Rail is expensive, but compared to it coming from other places, not as expensive, but nonetheless expensive. And so, we really need to start reevaluating what energy security really means, whether we should be considering increasing our pipeline capacity. And of course, with Mexico, it's a little bit different situation because of the actually controls or over the energy economy in Mexico in terms of foreign investment.
Right. So we've talked about the history of the USMCA, some of the pros and cons, and how it can be leveraged to deal with current global supply chain challenges. Next, we're going to talk about what goes, beyond USMCA and what are some of the tensions on the border. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back.
As war rages in Ukraine, the Conference Board is closely monitoring the situation and producing timely and relevant content on a daily basis that will help the business community navigate this global geopolitical unrest. What will the impact be on oil prices, food prices, our supply chain, and what about cybersecurity? How will this conflict impact the way your organization does business around the world, and how will you communicate this crisis to customers and employees? We're gathering the very latest content on our website. Just head to conference-board.org and find trusted insights to help you and your team lead with confidence.
Welcome back to CEO Perspectives. I'm your host, Steve Odland, the CEO of the Conference Board, and I'm joined today by Dr. Lori Esposito Murray, the president of the Committee for Economic Development, which is the public policy center of the Conference Board. So, Lori, if we did what you were just talking about before the break and integrated our energy supplies, and intertwined them a little bit more between Canada, United States, and Mexico, could the three countries be energy independent?
Steve, I think that is more than just a possibility. I think it's a probability. Already Canada and Mexico are the number one, number two suppliers of oil to the United States. It's really important in terms of the energy sector, really important to us. As I said, it's not a supply problem. It's a question of just making sure we can get the actual transportation, the capacity taken care of. And of course, with Mexico, it's a little bit different situation in terms of liberalization of the economy. But in any case, it is a probability that this could happen. And it is in the three countries' interests to do this. And I think we'll probably see our policies, or we should be seeing our policies moving in that direction.
Yeah. Now, then you have the electric grid, and I know that there are, some cross-border components to the grid. But if you start thinking about it, with hydro up north and the ability for renewables, wind and solar, in the sun-drenched areas of Mexico, it just seems like we have an ability here to kind of link the grids and think of it as, one major grid. Is that, now there are defense issues with that, I understand, but is that out of the question?
Steve, that's not out of the question at all. In fact, it's very much in the, again, in the zone of a probability, possibility. It's a little bit more difficult because of than I would say on the energy side. But we already have a highly integrated electricity grid with Canada. That it provides a lot of electricity already to the Northeast. That's already in place. The Mexican electricity market was actually opened up in 2014, and today we have large-scale volumes of electricity flowing back and forth across the border, and that has increased. And of course, this is in the consumer's interest because the more supply we have of electricity, the cheaper prices are. So again, it's something that's in everyone's interest. The problem, though, that we're confronting right now, as a matter of fact, we were the United States was just in discussions, negotiations with Mexico on these issues, is that Mexico is actually moving towards more protectionism in terms of their electricity reform and rolling back some of the liberalization that took place in 2014, which may actually violate the USMCA if they get there, which means we have recourse. So it's actually good to have an agreement in place. But nonetheless, Mexico is moving in a different direction. And so, I think that in and of itself, given where the Mexican economy is going, particularly in this area, presents some difficulties. And we are in discussions with them just this past week.
Yeah, so there are some risks, but there's great renewables north and south of the United States, but there's also oil and natural gas, and the pipelines have been problematic. Everybody knows about the Keystone XL pipeline, but if you produced the electricity near to where you're extracting the oil or the natural gas, you wouldn't need the pipeline. You would just need, the power lines. And so an integrated grid may be just, a way around having to deal with, with shipping the raw materials. So something to consider. Should the USMCA be expanded? I mean, this is obviously proven to be pretty successful. The demagoguery set aside and the politics set aside, it has raised the well-being of people, after you get through the adjustments in all three countries. Should we, you've got a lot of migrants coming in from Central America. Should we be thinking about adding nations?
Steve, that is definitely should be on, again, our policy agenda. We already have free trade agreements with a number of Latin American countries: Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Central American countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. There are a number of Latin, South American, and Central American countries that we already have free trade agreements with. And so expanding NAFTA, all these negotiations are difficult, but it's not, we have the groundwork. We have free trade agreements there, and this would be expanding the free trade agreement. So part of traditionally, I would say, in terms of U.S. foreign policy, is that we have always had a tendency to look east and west and not pay as much attention to our southern border countries as we should. And it's interesting because I think that's changing only because our economic competitor, China in particular, is paying a lot of attention to South America. And so, this is an area that not only will be economically beneficial, but I also think for national security reasons, it's in our interests to help to work with those countries to help both our economies, all of our economies, grow and prosper along market economic principles.
And you have a lot of issues at the southern border, the U.S.-Mexico border, a lot of it due to Guatemalan and Salvadoran migrants who are seeking a better life coming across it. But, if we actually, incorporated those nations as part of the free trade agreement, you would think that jobs could be located there, the standard of living could be located there, and, that would be helpful for the cost of goods for U.S. Consumers, but also it might ease some of the issues at the border.
Right. And I would caution, though, that was part of the hope of NAFTA and became one of the disappointments in terms of whether the agreement was actually able to produce that. But needless to say, you can't ignore the connection between an economy that works at home and people wanting to stay there and live and prosper in their home countries.
So what should Mexico be doing differently? Because you're right, that was it's still a source of tension that Mexico's allowing these migrants to come across their country. And part of NAFTA was to try to get to, more consistent policies. What do you think Mexico should be doing different to ease this situation?
Well, what's interesting is that I think in terms of U.S.-Mexican policy, I think we need to focus more on the economic issues. We spend so much time on the border issues as opposed to spending time with Mexico working on the economic issues. And as I said, there are a couple of critical areas now where Mexico seems to be backtracking on some of, or at least looking like they're going to be backtracking on some of the liberalizations that they have put in place in terms of their economy. But I would also say, and this is so important, Steve, is that this is a moment of opportunity for Mexico. You have businesses, global businesses, and these are not just US-based businesses, trying to figure out what to do about China and their business in China. And so they are looking to other Asia countries, and they're looking to Mexico. The reason why Mexico doesn't get an automatic yes, let's move to Mexico, it's totally teed up to, because as I said, they've been integrated into the US economy. You would think it would be the number one spot to go, but it has to do with, as I said, this rollback in their economic policies. But even more importantly, I think it's the anti-corruption and the drug cartels, the problems there on those three issues.
Yeah, and it's also the migrants. And we've talked about this in the past, but that you've got people that are coming through Mexico to seek asylum in the U.S. Well, they're not trying to seek asylum from Mexico, so this is a source of friction between the U.S. and Mexico. As you're aiding and abetting these people, and let's deal with the problem at Mexico's southern border rather than the U.S. southern border. But that contributes to a lot of this too, because you can't just separate the discussion on trade from these other discussions.
Exactly. And that gets to your question, which I apologize that I did not pay as much attention to as I should, as to whether this is a defense agreement. And it is a trade agreement, but it has national security implications.
That's right.
And the national security implications, as I said, one of the expectations for the agreement was that it would ease the border problems in terms of the pressure on the U.S. and the pressure that on Mexico. And
yeah, because there's the migrant issue, which I think most people are sympathetic to, but there are also human trafficking. Right. You said the cartels are moving fentanyl and other terrible drugs across the border. There are some terrorists coming across. We have caught some. So these are friction points, and Mexico could solve this. And it just seems to me that if we could use this trade agreement more broadly and integrate more deeply, and if Mexico would adhere to these agreements, we could solve a lot of issues and really make great progress, and in so doing help with our own defense and make the world safer for American citizens. But maybe that's just trying to boil the ocean all in one agreement. But I don't know. Your thoughts?
I know, I agree. I mean, this was a precedent-setting agreement in 1994. It was there at the creation of globalization. It has increased and improved the standards of living in all three countries. It has opened up an economy and really helped in terms of consumer pricing and supplies and economic efficiencies. If you look at it that way, and you recognize the strengths of this agreement, and also recognize the fact that even the improvements that were made in the USMCA are really significant in terms of labor rights and updating it and building a larger consensus for free trade agreements. I mean, that is probably the most significant piece of what happens with USMCA, and we ought to build on that and make sure that we become in this period of extreme disruption, when supply chains are being distracted and torn apart. We have this opportunity to prosper with this agreement and let it grow more, as well as you said, look to expanding it to our near neighbors.
Yeah, we have a lifetime opportunity and an urgency all wrapped in one. So, well, let's see if anyone's listening to us in Washington. It would be great to make some policy progress on this. Dr. Lori Esposito Murray, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Steve. My pleasure.
And thanks to everyone for listening in to CEO Perspectives. Every week, I'll be joined by an expert to talk about the issues of our time. We'll cover leading topics in geopolitics, economics, human capital, public policy, ESG, and more. Please share CEO Perspectives with your colleagues. I know that they'll want to listen. I'm Steve Odland, and this webcast and podcast have been brought to you by the Conference Board.